The rain came early that afternoon, soft at first, then turning into a steady drumming against the old church's tin roof. I stood by the oak tree at the edge of the parking lot, clutching a thin folder in one hand, my dress shoes sinking into the mud. Inside, my father gave a toast, laughter spilling out into the misty air. Through the fogged-up window, I saw them all. My parents, Ryan, my brother, neighbors we hadn't seen since childhood, everyone smiling, raising glasses. A banner drooped slightly from the ceiling. "Congratulations, Ryan. Our future." Not I shifted the folder, feeling the corner bite into my palm. It held the paperwork I'd spent the last 6. They just hadn't wanted to see it. The moment that broke something in me wasn't the speeches. It wasn't even my father's laugh, that deep, rumbling sound he used to reserve for fishing trips and late-night barbecues. It was the toy. On the table nearest the window, tucked between a centerpiece of yellow chrysanthemums, sat a battered, stuffed elephant. I remembered how proud he'd now the elephant sat as decoration for Ryan's celebration. I don't remember deciding to leave. One moment I made it to my car without slipping. Though the mud clung, I sat there for a long time, staring through the fogged windshield, listening to the rain tap against the glass. I thought about going back, about bursting through the door, waving the folder in their faces, shouting that I had worth too. But even as the thought crossed my mind, it died. Because the truth was simple. They already knew. They just didn't. I set the folder gently on the passenger seat, turned the key in the ignition, and drove away. The stuffed elephant's faded blue ribbon flashing once in the rearview mirror before disappearing into the rain. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky still wore a dull, bruised color. I packed my things quietly. A single duffel bag, my laptop, the folder of documents I'd carried through the storm. The house creaked around me, empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock over the mantel. Ryan's laughter still echoed faintly in my mind. His voice had carried the loudest last night. Dad's hand on his shoulder. Mom's teary-eyed smile. I wondered if they even noticed I wasn't there. There was no confrontation, no shouts or demands, only absence, mine, folding neatly into the fabric of their lives like a thread snipped without ceremony. I left a note on the kitchen table. Nothing dramatic, just 3 words, written with a steady hand. Thank you. Goodbye. No signature. None was needed. It would be enough for them to move on, just as they already had. Before stepping out, I passed the living room. The mantel was lined with family photos, Christmases, birthdays, graduations. Ryan was everywhere, front and center, a smile ready for the world. I searched for my own face and found it, a single photo tucked in the back, half obscured by a decorative vase. The edges were curling, the colors fading, a fitting place for a fading daughter. I closed the door softly behind me, the final click like a nail sealing a box. A month passed. Ryan thrived. The news trickled through mutual acquaintances, social media posts, Christmas cards, sent to addresses that no longer included mine. A new promotion at Dad's company, an engagement to a girl I'd never met, a planned down payment on a house. A generous gift from the family, they said. Meanwhile, I worked nights at a downtown cafe, saving every dollar I could, watching people rush past the fogged windows with lives stitched neatly together, marriages, mortgages, hand-in-hand futures. Ryan's life was expanding. Mine was compressing, distilling into something harder, sharper. I heard whispers about his struggles too, how he'd taken out loans under the company's name without full approvals, gambling on investments to impress Dad. But no one spoke of it openly. The family protected its golden boy. I was just a ghost now, the daughter they once had, easier to forget than confront. The last tie broke one Friday evening when I saw a copy of the company's annual gala program posted online. Ryan's face beamed from the cover next to the words, "The future of our family legacy." No mention of me, no memory that I had once been named the heir apparent, long before I chose a different path. I closed the browser and sat back in my chair, the neon lights of the cafe throwing fractured shadows across my hands. They hadn't just moved on. They had rewritten the story entirely and erased me from the first page. The apartment smelled faintly of paint and old wood. It wasn't much, a single room over an auto parts store, with a rattling heater and a window that stuck in the frame. But it was mine. I set my duffel bag down, hearing the hollow thud against the bare floorboards. A mattress, a thrifted desk, a second-hand lamp. No family portraits, no stuffed elephants. Just space. A blank page. I found the posting at the cafe. A handwritten ad pinned between missing pet flyers and discount. Tutoring offers. Administrative assistant needed, no experience required. Discretion essential. It sounded odd enough to be interesting. The address led me to an office tucked above a bakery, faded blue awning, chipped doorframe, and the smell of fresh bread wafting up the narrow stairwell. Inside, a woman sat, behind a battered oak desk, tapping a fountain pen against her knee. She was maybe in her 60s, with steel gray hair pulled into a bun, and a gaze that seemed to see straight through me. "You're late," she said, not unkindly. I checked my watch. I wasn't. She smiled faintly. "Punctuality isn't just about the clock. It's about whether your heart has already arrived." I didn't understand then, but I nodded. She introduced herself as Ms. Whitmore, owner of a private consulting firm. Contracts, research, financial assessments. Quiet work. Invisible work. Exactly the kind of existence I needed. She didn't ask about my education. She didn't ask about my family. She asked only one question. "Can you keep your head when the ground shifts under you?" I said yes. And I meant it. The first months were brutal. Ms. Whitmore didn't coddle. She handed me dense files, impossible deadlines, cold instructions delivered without sugarcoating. I made mistakes. I stayed late. I fought back tears over typo-riddled reports and misunderstood tasks, but I never quit. There were days I wanted to, when the loneliness pressed down so hard it felt like a second gravity. On those nights, I would sit by the window, knees pulled to my chest, watching the city flicker around me like a living thing. Messy, imperfect, surviving. Slowly, something inside me hardened. Not in anger, in resilience. I learned contracts. I learned negotiations. I learned the art of saying little and noticing everything. Ms. Whitmore was merciless in her feedback, but once, after a particularly grueling project, she left a sticky note on my desk. "Steel is forged in fire." I kept that note in my wallet. I never told my family where I was. No Christmas cards, no birthday calls, no Facebook updates. Let them believe I had disappeared. It was easier that way. From a distance, I watched Ryan's life unfold. Headlines, LinkedIn updates, whispered mentions. He married, he climbed higher. He bought a house 3 streets away from the one I used to call home. To the outside world, he was the prodigal son made good. They didn't see the cracks forming, lawsuits pending, partnerships strained, growing rumors about mishandled funds. But I saw, because I understood now what Ms. Whitmore had been teaching me all along. Control isn't about being seen. It's about seeing everything, quietly. 2 years into the job, Ms. Whitmore called me into her office on a rainy Thursday afternoon. She handed me a thin folder, her face unreadable. Inside, an offer, a promotion, equity, a seat at the table. Not because I was the loudest, not because I demanded it, but because I had become indispensable, a thread woven so tightly into the fabric of the business that pulling me out would unravel the whole thing. Ms. Whitmore leaned back, studying me. "You could start your own firm now," she said almost lazily. I hesitated, then smiled, a small, private smile. "I'm not done learning yet," I said. She laughed, a real surprise laugh that startled even herself. "Good," she said, "because the world has no shortage of fools, and there's always room for one more quiet warrior." That night, I walked home without an umbrella, letting the rain soak into my skin. I wasn't the daughter they celebrated. I wasn't the legacy they bragged about. But under the blurred neon and the soft hum of the city, I realized something. I was becoming something no family photo could capture. Someone real. It was a Thursday afternoon when I first heard the news. Sitting at my desk reviewing a complicated contract, I caught a headline flashing across my phone screen. Local business leader Ryan Whitmore, appointed as vice president of Whitmore Holdings. I stared at the photo that accompanied the article. Ryan, standing proudly next to our father, both beaming for the camera. The article praised his vision, his natural leadership, and most of all, his role in expanding the family's investments into new ambitious projects. No mention of the risks. No mention of the quiet failures piling up behind closed doors. Ms. Whitmore glanced at my screen but said nothing. She didn't need to. She had taught me long ago that sometimes silence said everything. That night, scrolling through the company's public announcements, I noticed something else. A grand gala was being planned, an anniversary event celebrating 3 generations of Whitmore excellence. My father would be honored, Ryan would be introduced as the future. It was all lined up, the perfect handoff, the perfect legacy, polished and gleaming for the world to admire. If you didn't know better, you would think the story was true. What they didn't realize, what they could never imagine, was that while they had been busy erecting their golden facade, I had been quietly collecting my own bricks, building something steadier, something real. Over the past 2 years, my work with Ms. Whitmore had expanded far beyond simple administrative tasks. I had helped broker contracts, uncover hidden liabilities, and even assist discreet investigations into companies with shaky financial ethics, including, quietly, Whitmore Holdings. It hadn't been planned at first, but when an anonymous tip landed on Ms. Whitmore's desk about unusual movements in the company's financials, I had volunteered to look into it. No personal motivation, I told myself, just professionalism. But as the reports unfolded, the unsanctioned loans, the quiet payouts, the tangled web Ryan had spun, I realized the truth was simpler. They had written me out of their story, but they couldn't erase the facts, and the facts were starting to catch up with them. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel, a sprawling room lined with chandeliers, gold accents, and pride thick enough to taste. I didn't buy a ticket. I didn't need an invitation. I had something far more valuable: evidence. When I stepped inside, the reception was already in full swing. The air smelled of polished wood, champagne, and old money. Waiters floated past with silver trays, and the string quartet played something soft and forgettable in the background. Across the room, my family stood under a massive banner that read, "Building a Legacy, Past, Present, and Future." Dad at the center, raising his glass, Mom beaming at Ryan. Ryan, wearing the kind of grin that only comes from thinking you've already won. I stayed in the shadows at first, watching. Ryan took the microphone, thanking the guests, recounting the family's proud history, layering his words with practiced humility. He spoke of growth, of bold leadership, of a future secured by hard work and vision. Cameras flashed. People clapped. He spoke like a king addressing his court. When the applause swelled, I stepped forward, quiet, deliberate, and waited just long enough for the energy in the room to crest and settle. At first, no one noticed. Then a few heads turned. A ripple passed through the crowd like a shiver. Ryan faltered at the podium, mid-sentence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Instead, I moved to the front row and laid a single manila folder on the edge of the stage. My movements slow, precise. Inside, documentation, financial records, forged approvals, payouts disguised as consulting fees, all tied back to Ryan. The noise in the room dulled to a thick, heavy silence. Dad stepped forward, confusion flickering across his face. Ryan tried to laugh it off. "I'm sure this is some misunderstanding." But his voice cracked halfway through. Ms. Whitmore, standing quietly by the door, nodded once when she caught my eye. She had taught me well. There was no need for anger. The truth, unveiled plainly, had its own gravity. The event coordinator, pale as linen, picked up the folder and whispered to the man next to her, a local journalist whose expression sharpened like a blade. I met Ryan's eyes, once bright with easy confidence, now darting and cornered. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The room seemed to tilt, energy shifting as realization rippled outward. Guests murmured, some edged toward the exits. The power that had once buoyed Ryan now slipped through his fingers, invisible but unmistakable. I turned before the shouting started, before the accusations flew. I didn't need to watch the unravel, it wasn't my story anymore. As I walked toward the exit, the soft click of my heels against the marble floor was the only sound I left behind. The ballroom was a different place now. The music had stuttered to a halt. Conversations dropped into urgent, furious whispers. Across the marble floor, Dad cornered Ryan near the stage, his voice low but sharp enough to carry. Ryan's hands moved. in frantic defensive gestures, but the weight of the evidence lay between them, undeniable, inarguable. I stood near the back, half in shadow, invisible in the way only a daughter made unwelcome could be. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. I watched. Mom was crying, one hand pressed to her mouth, mascara running down her cheeks. A few family friends hovered awkwardly at the edges, trying to decide whether loyalty or reputation mattered more. The event planner whispered frantically into her headset. The journalists smelled blood in the water, gathering like sharks, notepad apps open, recording everything they could. Dad shook his head slowly at Ryan, his face collapsing inward, like a building sinking under its own rotten foundations. It wasn't just the fraud. It was the betrayal. The illusion he had built. The golden sun. The perfect future. Shattering in public, beyond repair. And me? I felt nothing. No triumph. No bitterness. Just a clean, hollow ache where old hopes used to live. A security officer approached me hesitantly, asked if I needed assistance, his tone careful. I shook my head. I'm just leaving, I said, my voice steady. He nodded, relieved, but as I turned toward the door, Dad's voice rang out behind me, raw, desperate. Emily, wait. I stopped but didn't turn around. You don't have to do this, he said, his voice cracking on the last word. We can fix this. We're still a family. For a moment, I let the words hang there, tasting the weight of them. Family. The word used to mean shared holidays, laughter around worn-out dinner tables, long drives with broken radios and bad singing. Now it was just noise, a hollow promise from people who had already turned their backs when it counted most. I faced him, finally, his shoulders slumped under the weight of shame and realization. Ryan stood a few feet behind him, his face still, set in stubborn disbelief, as if denial could rewind the last 20 minutes. I'm not doing anything to you, I said quietly. I'm just refusing to lie for you. Dad opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. In that silence, every choice they had made over the years echoed louder than any apology ever could. Turned back toward the door. This time, no one tried to stop me. Ms. Whitmore waited near the entrance, a soft, knowing look in her eyes. She didn't say a word, just gave a slight nod, the kind of gesture that says, without arrogance or pity, you did the hard thing. You chose yourself. As I stepped out into the cold night, the sharp air bit into my lungs, but it felt clean, honest. I pulled my coat tighter around me and kept walking. Behind me, the legacy they had tried so hard to build crumbled quietly, piece by piece. And ahead of me, for the first time in years, was something far better. A life that was truly mine. The morning after the gala, the city woke up as if nothing had changed. Coffee shops opened. Buses rumbled down wet streets. Sunlight caught on the office towers, sharp and indifferent. Life, indifferent to human collapse, carried on. I sat at the corner table of a small cafe downtown, a place with cracked leather booths and chipped porcelain mugs. Across from me, Ms. Whitmore sipped her coffee, eyes on the window saying nothing. She didn't need to. Some victories didn't call for toasts or speeches. Some simply required breathing, quietly, in the open space where shame used to live. My phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. I didn't open it. I already knew the contents. Apologies too late, regrets too shallow, promises from people who had only ever valued me when it was convenient. I placed the phone face down on the table and turned my attention back to my coffee. Outside, a boy rode past on a bicycle, trailing a kite behind him, the bright fabric snapping in the wind. It caught the morning light, flashing gold, red, and blue against the gray sky. For a long moment, I simply watched it dance higher and higher. No revenge, no anger, no public gloating, just distance, just freedom. Some stories didn't end with doors slamming or courtroom showdowns. Some ended with a woman sitting in a quiet cafe, breathing easier than she had in years, the past finally folding itself into something smaller, something she could set down without apology. I finished my coffee, tucked the unopened message into the pocket of forgetting, and stepped out into the morning. The kite was still rising, and so was I.